Hello, I'm Craig Rice, Montgomery County Council member for District 2, inviting you to join me for a conversation with Maryland's Lieutenant Governor Anthony Brown. That's coming up next, right here on County Cable Montgomery.
On this No Boundaries, County Cable Montgomery staff set up their mobile studio at La Canela, a family-owned Peruvian restaurant in Rockville Town Center. Joining the conversation today is Montgomery County Councilmember Craig Rice and Maryland's Lieutenant Governor Anthony Brown. It was a chance for the two men, who originally met when Rice was a delegate in Annapolis, to share their perspectives today.
Well, Lieutenant Governor Brown, I just wanted to say thank you very much for taking the time out of your very busy schedule to sit down and talk with me on this episode of No Boundaries. I think it's really important for people to kind of understand what it is that we do, but more importantly, understand the other sides of our life that are equally important and really weigh into the decisions that we make.
Craig, thanks for having me here on this program. And when I saw, it was called no boundaries. I said, uh-oh, what am I getting into? Nothing's off limits, right? But no, I'm really excited to be here with you, and we certainly miss you down in Annapolis. I appreciated the one term that we served together in the House of Delegates, and I greatly appreciate your partnership now and your role in county government on the county council, because you understand how important it is that relationship, that partnership between state government and county government, and when the relationship is strong, it just benefits your constituents, the residents of Montgomery County.
For those who don't know a lot about you, just briefly, you served 2 terms in Annapolis and state representative there as a state delegate representing Prince George's County, but in addition to that, also served in the United States Army. And you currently are the highest ranking elected official that actually served in wartime in Iraq. And I think that that's something that's not only interesting, but also very commendable. My father actually fought in Vietnam in the United States Marine Corps, and so I've got a special affinity and a place in my heart for those who serve in the military. Can you tell me a little bit about, your experience?
I've been blessed with tremendous opportunities in my life, whether it's the schools I went to or the opportunity to serve with patriotic men and women, first on active duty when I graduated college, after graduating from the ROTC program at Harvard College, spent 5 years on active duty, about 3.5 in Germany, flying helicopters. And then I was in the reserves for a number of years, and I think it was in March of 2004 when one of our colleagues in the General Assembly asked me on the 1-year anniversary of us going into Iraq, asked me, well, do you think you'll be called to serve in Iraq? And my response was, well, if so, then I think we're probably in big trouble. And sure enough, about 2 months later, I had a set of orders going to Iraq, and I deployed to Iraq with about 1,000 soldiers from a Civil Affairs Command out of New York, the 353rd Civil Affairs Command. Our mission was to help rebuild civil institutions, rebuild government and schools and hospitals, and work with local law enforcement to rebuild their capacity and their organization. And this was in 2004, 2005. We all went over there believing that we were going to make a big difference to reestablish or to establish democracy in an open society. And at that point, still early in that conflict, our participation in the war made just little progress. But I learned a lot, a lesson from that experience. And what I learned is that families, no matter where they live, whether they're in Baltimore or in Bethesda, or whether they're in Baghdad or in Fallujah in Iraq, they all want the same things for their families. They want safe neighborhoods, and they want opportunities that start with a good education and then jobs. They want access to health care and a healthy living. They want a clean environment. And that's true wherever you go. And I learned that. I saw that. I observed that in Iraq. And I think as a result, I find myself being a much more empathetic public servant. So it was an interesting experience. I'm glad I'm home. I'm glad that the president ended our war in Iraq. So thanks for asking me about that one.
A lot of people really don't understand the true sacrifice that really goes into not only public service, but also being involved in the military. I decided to try and follow in my father's footsteps by joining Naval ROTC, went out to University of Illinois, went to flight school down at Corpus Christi, and it was down there that unfortunately I saw a lot of ensigns that were getting a lot of simulator time, weren't really getting any flight time, and so said to myself, is this really something that I wanted to definitely do without the guarantee of me being able to do the thing I love, which is fly? So I'm quite envious with your helicopter experience.
It was a great way to serve because it's exciting, aviation's exciting, and be able to fly all over Germany at 100 feet above treetop, right, all over Germany. That was pretty exciting. But what was really most rewarding about my service as an aviator in the Army was just the people that I got to serve with. These were men and women from all over this country. Some of them were mechanics, and some of them were medics, and some intelligence officers. All of us sort of feeling as if we were contributing to this larger noble cause, which was protecting and defending our country. And that was probably the most rewarding part of service. And I think that's true for most people that put the uniform on. Right. And I'm sure your father experienced that as well.
It requires a set of demanding skills to be and serve in the military. And so I want to talk a little bit about those demands. I know that you're a family man and have 2 wonderful children. I've got 3, a boy who's 17, a girl who's 6, and another who's 9. And it really is difficult to be able to manage between serving in public office, but then also maintaining that family life. I'm wondering how you deal with that stress, especially being at your level. You are the Lieutenant Governor of the state of Maryland and are expected to be everywhere. How does that work for you?
Well, first of all, I wish I had my BlackBerry with me, but I left it in the car so as not to interfere with
that's a major violation.
the technology of the taping here. But what I do is I literally take out my BlackBerry, and because my BlackBerry is synchronized with my work calendar, much to the dismay of my scheduler, who would not want me to have that input in my own calendar. Right. But I literally, in the beginning of every month, I sit down and I look at my children's schedule. And I look at Rebecca's, winter orchestra concert date, and that goes in the calendar. But not just that, but also, when are her violin lessons? Because I'd like to go to those as well. I don't want to just go to the performance. I'd like to go to the preparation leading up to that and showing her that I support her in doing that. And obviously, you can't make every violin lesson. And I put down all of my son's baseball games and his practices, and I try to make it. So what I do by taking that BlackBerry out every month, and then sort of every week going back to it, I'm making it a priority. And that doesn't mean that I get to attend everything that my children are doing, but it means that I have that constant reminder that, my children have activities, I need to participate in those, and that when we make a decision to schedule something that interferes with my children's activities, I'm very mindful of it. And I make sure that it doesn't become something that, at the end of the year you look back and you say, boy, did I miss everything. Right. So I think it's about making it a priority and working it into all the busy things that we do as professionals. I mean, you have 3 children, and you're managing your council member duties, which require being in the community many nights a week. You've got your family and your wonderful wife, and balancing that. Plus, we're balancing our personal needs like fitness and our other interests and things like that. So I do it I use that BlackBerry to make sure that I'm keeping track of what my kids are doing.
When you're talking about balancing the life, it also not only involves just the family life, but also the Annapolis life. I'm just curious as to, when it comes to the issues, what issues do you find for you tend to take the most time when it comes to a state level?
When Governor O'Malley and I first decided to run for office together, we sat down and reached agreement on what my portfolio would be. And we looked at what my interests were, my background, my experience, also what his interests were, what he wanted to personally hold on to as the governor. And we ended up carving out a few areas. Carve out is probably not the best way to put it, but identify some areas where he's asked me to take a lead on behalf of the administration. Healthcare, higher education, economic development. And since taking office, I've also expanded that into veterans issues. We just talked about my military service, so I certainly have an affinity for veterans and what are we doing in the state to support our veterans and their families, but also the issues of domestic violence, foster care and adoption. of those, probably the one area where I spend a good portion of my time is in healthcare. And 2 years ago in March, President Obama signed the Affordable Care Act, national health reform. Maryland has been, and you remember this from your days in the legislature, in a perpetual state of health reform, always looking for ways to expand access to care, improve the quality of care, reduce the cost of delivering that care. So we embraced the President's Affordable Care Act and what that meant for Marylanders. And what that means for me is, really spending a lot of time on reform and implementing reform in Maryland. Establishing the Health Benefits Exchange, which is the mini marketplace where individuals and small businesses, many of whom have never had access to health insurance, they'll go to this market to purchase competitively priced, affordable products. Also looking at health disparities and how can we use the provisions of reform to address the disparities that exist in not just Maryland, it exists throughout the country, but we have some in Maryland as well. So health reform and health care is the area that I probably spend most of my time in terms of policy areas.
Have you heard the news? Montgomery Community Media has a brand new website at mymcmedia.org. Now it's easier than ever to search for TV schedules, show topics, and guests. Host your community events and share your comments with others. And be a voice in the community. All this and much more. See what's new at mymcmedia.org. Don't just watch media, make it happen.
From La Canela in downtown Rockville, No Boundaries with Montgomery County Councilmember Craig Rice and Maryland's Lieutenant Governor continues. Before the break, the conversation focused on healthcare initiatives in Maryland. To follow up, Councilmember Rice asked the Lieutenant Governor if there was a personal side to his interest.
My father's a doctor, and he's 87 years old. He still sees patients.
Wait, he still sees patients?
Well, yeah, and they're in good hands. Because he sees patients 1 day a week.
Okay.
And my father grew up in a very poor community in Kingston, Jamaica, and he saw a lot of illness and disease. Much of it never went treated. And when he graduated high school, he said to his mother, who was already in this country, that he would like for her to send for him to come to this country to go to college because he wanted to be a doctor. And all he wanted to do was heal people. So she did that. She didn't have a lot of money. In fact, if you either read the book or saw the movie The Help, that was my grandmother. She worked in the homes of wealthy people. She prepared their meals, raised their families, cleaned their toilets. But she wasn't wealthy, but she knew enough about the importance of a good education. My father was the first in our family to go to college, and when he graduated medical school, he spent most of his career serving patients, seeing patients, treating patients in some of the poorest hospitals in the community where we grew up. And my father proved that not all medical doctors are wealthy, but what he didn't make in a weekly paycheck certainly was made up for by the personal and professional reward and satisfaction of knowing that he made a difference in the lives of his patients. And he taught me and my brothers and sister sort of the lesson of the responsibility to serve other people. Right? And he showed us that every day in the way that he lived his life and the things that he did as a doctor. So, as I grew up, I thought about ways that I would serve. And I didn't become a doctor, but I'd like to think that some of the things that I'm able to do as Lieutenant Governor is to empower doctors, to improve the quality of life of their patients and the people that they see every day. So I've focused a lot as a public official on health policy, health practices, the whole health payment and delivery system. Right. A lot of doctors and other providers provide care to patients without compensation. Right. But under national reform, we have a real opportunity to expand access to care, appropriately reimburse providers, and just improve the quality of care of more and more Marylanders.
And I couldn't agree with you more, and it's just very interesting in terms of how you kind of migrated towards healthcare, because I have the same story with my mother, who grew up in rural South Carolina. one of 14 brothers and sisters whose parents were sharecroppers. And my mother gained a passion for education. And you know, when she met my dad was down at Fort Sumter in the Marine Corps, and she met him down there. And my father had a deaf uncle, or a deaf brother, I'm sorry, my deaf uncle. And she became very interested in special education, and then went to Howard University, got her master's degree in special education, and started teaching at Gallaudet, Model Secondary School for the Deaf that's at Gallaudet University in Washington, D.C., and began a career dedicated to education. And that's why education is so important to me right now, and why I served on education subcommittees in Annapolis and now here on the county council. And it's just very interesting in terms of how our parents in their quests have driven us, you know, to the different careers that we want to.
And I know you've also done a lot in the area of the developmentally disabled community and special needs populations. Right. So, you know, I think both of us recognize that it's important to bring our personal experiences to the public work that we do, because it's our experiences that sort of, you know, create that passion and that drive to make a difference, not just for our families, but for similarly situated families. Right. and our neighbors who have the same experience to improve their quality of life. So I certainly, you know, admire and respect you for doing that.
Well, no, thank you very much, and thank you for your great work on healthcare. You know, and you said something that I think resonates when you talk about working together and making sure that we kind of are all on the same path. You know, there's a lot of talk in Annapolis about the competing big jurisdictions between Montgomery and Prince George's, and myself representing Montgomery and you representing Prince George's in your previous time in the state legislature. I really think that more of it's overblown than what you hear. There's so many commonalities that are there, and some of the very things that you touched on, that you even saw the dynamics between the United States and what you see here and what you saw in Baghdad, Iraq, to where you've got the same sorts of things. You know, people care about the same sorts of things. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I'm curious as to what folks are saying on the other side of the county line when it comes to Prince George's and their ideas about Montgomery County.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think you're right, and this is the kind of the national capital region. We share so many things in common as in some ways, the suburbs of the nation's capital. We are you know, adjacent to Washington, D.C. We have the same challenges in terms of public safety and public education, public health. I think we're interconnected by a transportation network, whether it's roads or rail. The effort to establish the Purple Line, I think, really highlights how Prince George's and Montgomery are interconnected. I think the ICC does the same thing. So we are, in many ways, I mean, one region that happen to be divided by a boundary line, where on the one side it's called Prince George's and on the other side it's Montgomery County. Certainly we all have the same common goal of developing a world-class workforce to compete for the jobs and to attract the companies to this region. It starts in our K through 12 schools. And Prince George's County, while certainly not ranked at the same level of performance as the Montgomery County schools, making considerable progress. So it's certainly incumbent upon Montgomery County public officials, Prince George's County public officials, we at the state level, to ensure that all of our children in our schools are performing well, so they can compete for jobs in this very competitive region. So I think we're connected in so many ways, and just separated by that boundary that appears on a map.
Yeah, and I think that that's extremely important, and I think that really that's one of the driving factors that I think needs to go into a lot of this discussion that people continuously have about our metropolitan region, is that we need to work together to achieve a lot of the goals that are set forth by you and the governor's administration when it comes to making sure that Maryland's one of the best states. It doesn't happen through just one county. It's going to happen through all of us collectively rising, and I think that oftentimes it's unfortunate that people say, well, my jurisdiction has to be number one, and I want to keep all others down. That's not how we make ourselves better.
Healthy rivalries perhaps serve a purpose, but not when that rivalry is based on sort of subordinating, you know, your rival.
That's right.
You know,
that's right.
Do your best, be your best, rise to the top, but certainly not at the expense of others.
That's right.
But I'll tell you, in Annapolis, the relationship between the Prince George's County delegation, both the House and the Senate, and the Montgomery, it's a good relationship. They work together, and that's that kind of partnership and cooperation, coordination that is going to benefit this region. So I'm glad to see that that still exists.
You may have already heard that Pepco and soon BG&E will be installing new meters called smart meters for all customers in Maryland. Pepco has recently begun installations in Montgomery County, and they'll continue through 2012. You will receive information from your utility before they exchange your meter, which you should review carefully. This information helps explain the features of the new smart meters and when those features will be available.
So, I'm kind of new here, but I've noticed a trend. My human does this funny thing where she goes around and gets all my toys, and then she hides them in that basket by the door. It's like, hello, that's where you put it last time. You were the worst at hide and go seek.
As this No Boundaries continues, Montgomery County Councilmember Craig Rice and Maryland's Lieutenant Governor Anthony Brown discuss the challenges facing the entire state in these economic times. To start off this final segment, Councilmember Rice reflects on his experiences in Annapolis.
You know, I came into the state legislature in 2007, immediately had the special session. My head was spinning. I didn't know which way was up, and so it was a tremendous challenge. I know that for you, as a part of the gubernatorial administration, I know it must have been extremely difficult for you, especially when jobs we know mean so much to the state as well as to our individual jurisdictions. For me, it was tremendous difficulty in trying to find the right balance and understanding the cuts versus revenue generation, how that would affect economic development as well as jobs, transportation, the whole 9 yards. So if you could just tell me how your experience was with it on the other side.
Well, first of all, I think, Craig, the word that you use there, balance, that's the key. And so, of course, we have the constitutional requirement to balance the budget, but how do you do it? And we've taken a balanced approach. In each of the 5 or 6 budget cycles that Governor O'Malley and I have been involved in, and where we presented a budget to the General Assembly, we've had significant budget deficits that we've had to overcome. One year we had $1.7 billion. This year it's $1 billion, and while that number is significantly smaller than 1.7, the resources to sort of close that budget deficit aren't as plentiful. I mean, for example, there's no longer federal stimulus dollars. Also, in the years past, where there may be a surplus in one fund or another fund where you could divert those surpluses to the general operating budget, those aren't readily available. So this session has been very challenging, $1 billion deficit, and we've tried to address it with a combination of reducing expenditures, and in this year, we have had to increase revenues, and there are some proposals that are on the table. No one likes increasing revenues, increasing taxes or fees, and we don't take that lightly. But we've taken a balanced approach to close that budget deficit, and we're in the middle of that. And you know, we have the constitutional mandate to balance it. We will. It'll be a combination of reductions and increases.
It's interesting because when you get a lot of that pushback, you know, a lot of the things that I hear from people is they talk about jobs, and it makes me think about the myriad of jobs that need to be available. You had also mentioned earlier about whether a person decides they want to go to college or whether they want to get a certificate so that they can go off into some particular trade. I think that all of those things are important. It makes me think back to not only with me and my first job, I don't know if you're willing to share, but mine was working at McDonald's. And back then, those commercials for Calvin at McDonald's were very popular. And so I got a lot of ribbing from a lot of the kids at school. Would you share with me what your first job was?
My first job, yes, it was unskilled. It was not a middle skills type job. Didn't require a certificate or a degree, but I did learn a lot from it. The first job I ever had was pumping gas at a gas station. I pumped gas, I repaired tires, I changed the oil, and I learned a lot of sort of what we call the soft skills, the skills for being successful on a job, like, you know, understanding that you have to be on time. understanding that your employer has a goal and objective, and that as an employee you've got to support that. In our case, it was the customer satisfaction, serving the customers, making sure that customers came back, and the experience was as pleasant as possible. But also for me, it included money management. I was counting money and making sure I got that right, because if I didn't, it was coming out of my paycheck.
That's right.
You learn a lot of the soft skills in those entry level jobs. But speaking of jobs, in our budget this year, we have about $3.6 billion of budget items, whether it's in new school construction or in transportation projects or our rental housing works program, where we have about 50,000 jobs that could be created and will be created when we pass the O'Malley-Brown budget this legislative session. Some people say, how can you raise taxes, or how can you make the cuts that you do when we're trying to create jobs? And that's a great question. This budget probably has more job-creating line items than any budget we've seen in Maryland in about 3 decades.
It's interesting that you're talking about trying to have creative ways to be able to do some of the things that are extremely important. And I know one of those that you're extremely passionate about is public-private partnerships. I know that when I was in Annapolis, I had a little small bill that dealt specifically just with public-private partnerships in the Port of Baltimore. But I think that it's great that you're looking at expanding this into other transportation projects throughout the state. What are some of the things you're looking to do?
Your small bill had tremendous results, because our most successful public-private partnership is what we did at the Port of Baltimore. We attracted $140 million of private investment, created about 5,000 jobs, ensuring that the Port of Baltimore continues to be competitive. As larger ships are coming through the Panama Canal, they can dock at the Port of Baltimore and unload and load cargo, and not just sail by Baltimore for another port. So that's an example of a successful public-private partnership. We ought to be doing more of that in Maryland. So this session, we are proposing a public-private partnership framework where we can have an open and transparent, accountable process to attract more private dollars into our infrastructure, not just the port, but perhaps in roads and rail and social infrastructure like schools and libraries. Because we don't have the public resources to fund all of our infrastructure needs, so we need to attract private dollars.
Yeah, and I think the individual counties and jurisdictions should be following your footsteps. I know for us in Montgomery County, we have projects like the Purple Line that really are going to rely on more federal dollars than public-private partnerships, but even at some of the stations to where we can kind of glean that kind of relationship. I know with the Corridor City Transitway, the CCT, that's up specifically in my district, that's something that we're really looking at and leaning on as a way of creative financing, because we know just how important these projects are. And speaking of important projects, I know that you've been extremely passionate about BRAC, and I know that BRAC is now pretty much getting into its waning stages at this point, but I think that it's been a tremendous success, especially for us here in Montgomery County. And I don't know if you just wanted to talk a little bit about that, because I think that that's extremely important.
So BRAC has been successful around the state. We've brought in about 15,000 to 20,000 direct jobs in Bethesda Naval Medical, at Andrews, Fort Meade, Aberdeen, and Fort Detrick. It's also brought a lot of challenges, particularly here in Montgomery County around transportation. But because we have a strong federal delegation in Congress, we're able to bring in about $90 million to do some major transportation capacity upgrade in the vicinity of Bethesda Naval Medical and NIH to alleviate some of those transportation challenges. In the balance, I think BRAC has been a very positive event for Maryland.
Okay, well, excellent. Well, look, we've had a chance to talk about a lot, but I cannot let you off the hot seat without asking you the question. Are you going to run for governor?
Craig, let me answer it this way. I believe, got to clear my throat for this one. I believe that if you focus on your work in front of you and you do the best job that you can and you're successful and you can show results, that opportunities open up for you. And I also believe that my service to the people of Maryland will not end when my term as Lieutenant Governor does. So I'm looking for opportunities to continue serving, and once we get beyond 2012, I'll begin to focus on what's next for Anthony Brown.
Well, Lieutenant Governor, I can't thank you enough for spending time and sitting with me today. This has been great, and you've been watching No Boundaries here on County Cable Montgomery. Thanks so much.